Obama, or whoever, when they're actually taken over, in a sense, by their unconscious, they become a conduit for these archetypal forces to give voice to themselves. And because of that, now, like this perfect example would be Bush, because he's been with us for a number of years and we're all so familiar with him. He's been so, in a sense, taken over by his unconscious, by this archetype. And because it's so total, he's, in a sense, one can say he's the incarnation of this process. He's the revelation of this process. And so he's showing us what the process that's actually happening, he's the manifestation of it. So we can understand it by studying somebody who's taken over by it. And the way it works is that when somebody is so disassociated from their own darkness, and then, of course, they project out the shadow, which is a form of lying. It's a form, Jung calls projecting the shadow the lie, and who's the liar mythologically but the devil. So it's really involved with some sort of darker forces. But what happens when somebody, whether it be Bush or McCain or whoever, when they project out the shadow and they then, it's a form of lying to themselves, then they actually become entranced by their own lie, believing their own lie. But because of that, they seem to have a very convincing display, and they develop a certain charisma, because at that point they forfeited being like this human being, and the archetype is actually transmitting itself through them. And that archetype speaks through the collective unconscious, and they can be very charismatic, and they can have an entrancing effect on other people's unconscious. And of course, the whole thing is played out through fear. So it hooks people through their fear. And then, it's like a form of, like, whether it be like with hypnosis or like, just something like that, where all of a sudden people who are following, you see, one way of understanding this very clearly is to see that it's a form of like a virus. It's like it's what I call a psycho-spiritual, like this dis-ease of the soul, and it's like this bug in the system that propagates itself through the unconscious. Yes. And until we see that, we're fighting against it, but we're actually unwittingly feeding it, unless we're awake to the way that it actually is, like, kind of propagating itself. And so it's like one way of just to complete this thought is like, say people who don't see what's going on, whether it be with, whoever, with McCain, with Obama, with Bush, and they're actually supporting them and following them, thinking they're like, they're supporting their country and they're doing good in the world. They're unwittingly, in a non-local way, the agents through which that virus is replicating itself through the field. It's a field phenomena, and it needs to be, really contemplated as such.
So could one say that this, as you're describing, is kind of a function of the psyche, or even maybe the collective psyche, or maybe even nature, if we want to go that far, that this is, we're propping it up and we're feeding it, because this actually won't go away until we have properly understood it. So there's a lesson here, so to speak.
Yeah, that is totally it, because we're feeding off of it and we're feeding into it, and so it's like this tapeworm, which gets into a body, but the actual body that it's gotten into is like the consciousness of our species. And, I think of my friend, I don't know if you guys know, I'm sure a lot of your listeners do, Catherine Austin Fitz, and she's an amazing person that everybody should be studying, because she's so onto what's happening in the whole realm of, like, with finance and economics. And the metaphor that she's bringing forth is like a tapeworm. And a tapeworm, at a certain point, it gets into your system and it basically puts out chemicals so that you crave what's good for it. So it grows. And then it kills the host. And then when the host dies, it just goes to somebody else. And she says that's what's happening, to the extent that we're investing, like how the real voting is with our money, is with our money. And so how we're investing our money, for example, is, has an enormous effect. And if we're putting our money in the corporatocracy, in feeding the military industrial complex, we're ultimately feeding the tapeworm, which is supporting and feeding and creating our own genocide. And that's a suicide process. That's a form of madness. And that's what we're acting out on the world stage. You know, I mean, just take a look at what we're doing, where with all the thousands of these nuclear weapons, we're taking down the biosphere, which is the life support system of the planet. And we've all just collectively participated in a financial coup with this $700 billion, you know, the thing with the bailout.
Right.
That's insanity, because the people who we're giving the money to were the very people who created the problem in the first place. And so they're the ones who are profiting from it by us. It's like they've put a gun to our head and are blackmailing us. And all that I'm saying is that, why aren't more and more people talking about that? Because you see, once people kind of like have the awakening to the evil that's playing out, to the deeper process that's playing out, then we're stepping out of being complicit in it, because it can only happen to the extent that we're colluding with it and we're complicit with it.
Yeah.
And, of course, what I'm describing is the powers that be's their worst nightmare, is for a sufficient number of people to actually wake up to what they're doing. That's the one thing they don't want.
Indeed. And, you know, what does a kind of a leader like that, or an evil system represent, do you think? What is it, in us that brings that forward? You talked about like the archetype of the devil, for instance, or a demon in that sense. But I mean, there must be something that identify, it more identified with an evil system like that.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a perfect question, because what's playing out on the world stage is some expression of something in us. And one way to understand it, I mean, it's a great thing to always go back to seeing this as a dream, and what is the dream showing us? And if you contemplate it from that point of view, you discover that these darker forces, in a way, are coming out from hiding in the corners or underground, and they're just showing themselves. I mean, an example is the bailout. How much more obvious could it be that we're being held up and just, it's a total criminal act. But from the dreaming point of view, when the darker powers are becoming so clearly evident, that's an expression of that there's light that's just infusing into our world. And so that's a really important thing, because it's very easy to just get entranced into feeling pessimistic and then feeling not connected with our power and feeling helpless. And of course, that just feeds in to the darker forces.
Absolutely. I mean, do you think that all this have come about to begin with because we have neglected the dark side for so long? I've heard it might be Michael Tessarian who mentioned that the idea that when these darker archetypes, if you will, or even just archetypes, we don't have to put that kind of connotation on them. When we neglect them, they find ways to peer through into our reality, and the more we neglect them, in a way, the stronger they become.
Yeah, that's totally right on. And, the way to understand that, the whole thing with the war on consciousness, it has to do with the psyche, that the origin of the war on consciousness is the psyche. And the way to understand that is, to the extent that any one person is not associated with their own shadow, they project it out.
Yeah.
And then, of course, being that this is a dream, I mean, if you just think about it in a dream, if you're not connected with your own darkness, you're going to split off from your own darkness, project it out into the dream being just a reflection of your own inner process, because that's what a dream is, just will then send you all the evidence that you need in embodied form of people or events that embody your own shadow. So you're convinced it's really out there because it's seemingly appearing out there, which then just even more kind of reinforces your point of view that the shadow is outside of yourself. And now that's a process that happens. Of course, then we try to destroy the shadow out there, and by doing that, we actually become possessed by the very shadow that we're trying to destroy. And that whole process is a reflection of our inner splitting off from our own darkness. But the thing is, what I've just described in one person, that's happening collectively. That's happening with our species. So that's what I mean when I say the origin of what's playing out on the world stage is in the human psyche. So, and what that means is that for any one of us to actually see our own darkness, so say we see the evil playing out seemingly outside of ourselves, to the extent that any of us have the reflection that the evil we're seeing out there is a reflection.
Paul, are you there? Hello, Paul, can you hear me?
We're having an effect in this in a very real way.
Ah, shit. We got disconnected there, I think. Can you hear me? Hello, Henrik here. Can you hear me? Hello, Paul. Can you hear me? Can't hear anything from my end. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Something weird going on here. Okay, let's see here. I'll try to call you back in case you can hear me. I'll hang up and try to call you back. Let's see here. Hello?
Hi. Hello, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Hello?
Yes. Hello? Can you...
Yeah, I can hear you fine. That was strange, so that we just kind of got cut off.
Yeah, okay. Well, that happens sometimes. I think we'll just lost you when you were describing a little bit more about the dream and how, what we are, that everything we do is reflected, and the dream constantly tells us, basically what.
Right.
Yeah, so maybe if you can pick up from that point and we can continue.
Sure. Should I start now, or?
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So the thing I was saying is that to the extent that we see, that what's playing out there and the evil we see being played out on the stage of the world is a reflection of the darkness in ourselves. To the extent we see that and we can embrace that darkness within ourselves, that actually has a real effect on the entire collective unconscious in this local way, which is a physics term having to do with transcending, the typical the laws of space and time. And that's very important because that's basically pointing at that any of us doing our inner work and integrating our shadow or actually seeing the nature of the dream, that's having an enormous impact on the entire world, right out in that moment, both in time and outside of time.
Yes.
And that's a really important thing because you see, one of the dangers is to feel really like I was saying before, not empowered and to feel hopeless and helpless. But we're these amazingly powerful beings. We're these co-creators of what's happening. And what I'm pointing at with my work, when there are enough of us who actually discover that and tap into that and stabilize that, we can hook up with each other. And through that open heart of that expanded awareness, and we can change the waking dream we're having. And that's evolution. And that's not just some sort of woo-woo theory. That's what this is all about. Because being of the nature of a dream, what's happening, it's an instantaneous feedback loop that's continually reflecting back to us everything that we need to know to awaken. And to the extent we see that, that's what makes it so. It's exactly like a dream where it's just our own consciousness kind of manifesting and reflecting back to ourselves. But we become entranced by our own consciousness in a way that imprisons us and makes us feel really separate from each other and just cuts us off from our seeming, the intrinsic God-given power we have to call forth and create reality.
I'm thinking of the concept of lucid dreaming, when you actually become you take control basically of the dream in a little bit, or more correctly would be that you at least become aware that you are dreaming. Right now we're kind of immersed in the illusion, if you will. We're not we don't understand, just as you described, that we actually have the power to change it in that manner, but we have to become aware within the dream in order to actually change it, and do all these wonderful things,
totally. But the thing is, be careful of the idea of people who say to me, "Oh, I've have the recognition that I'm dreaming in my at night, and then I control the dream," because that's an expression that they're not